Snow time, winter time, Christmas time. The time of sugar plums, Santa Claus, and at last those lovable children from Peanuts. Enjoy a Charlie Brown Christmas. Meet Charlie Brown.
That's terrible, Charlie Brown!
This year, enjoy a Charlie Brown Christmas.
Welcome back, and today we're going to talk about this record. A Charlie Brown Christmas by Vince Guaraldi Trio. Before I talk about the record and Vince Guaraldi, who was a wonderful jazz pianist and had a long history in jazz before he composed the soundtrack music to this record in 1965, I was going to run a clip from Mad Men, the TV show Mad Men, where Don Draper talks about the power of nostalgia. And this record, for me and millions of baby boomers across America, across the world maybe, is a very nostalgic record. I can put this record on and hear a Peanuts theme, or Linus and Lucy, which is the Peanuts theme, or Christmas Time Is Here, which Guaraldi wrote both of those compositions, and it automatically transports me back. I'm 6 years old, and I'm in Michigan, and we're at my Uncle Tony or Uncle Spiro's house for Christmas, and the turkey, and everything smells wonderful, and there's a beautiful tree, and Detroit in the 1960s was the most positive place in the world. And my father and his brothers were all very positive people. So you really felt you could do anything. Eventually we moved outside of Detroit to a town called Milford. And we lived across the street from a Chevrolet test driver. And he would bring home cars a year before they came out. So I remember him bringing home Mustangs. That's Ford actually, isn't it? He brought home Stingrays, I believe, the Corvette Stingray. And it was just, it was like living in the future. It was such a wonderful place to live, and really such a wonderful time in America. That's when America was at its peak, I believe, as an industrial power, as a producer of jazz music. This record just automatically transports me there. And there's also, you have the Linus and Lucy theme, and he also does some beautiful swinging playing on this record with his trio. The song Christmas Time Is Here, I think with the Los Angeles Children's Choir or something, is such a beautiful tune, but it's also very sad. And I don't know why that is. It's very melancholic. And for me, at my age, I'm 60, that ties in with all those feelings of being a child. And in the Mad Men with Don Draper says, he quotes a Greek guy who says nostalgia is a longing to return back to a place where you know you are loved. And he uses that in the TV show to relate to, he's trying to sell this carousel player, and but he's relating back to his family that is coming apart, and he's showing slides of his family. So he's nostalgic for when his family was together. And I guess nostalgia in this context relates back to when we were children, and everything was wonderful, and you see life through a children's eye. But this is such a wonderful record, and I guess it's still iconic. Kraft reissued this. This is the silver foil edition. And this has been reissued. I feel like this had come out all through the year. But this began, to give you a little background on it, or to give you a little background on Vince Guaraldi, he really got his start with Cal Tjader, the pianist in Cal Tjader's band. And then he made many records on fantasy from 1956 to 1965, including modern music from San Francisco. Boy, I'd love to hear that. Vince Guaraldi Trio, A Flower is a Lovesome Thing. Jazz Impressions of Black Orpheus, that's a great record. The Latin side of Vince Guaraldi. The cover on that record is him with a blonde. And apparently, even while he was married, he had a long-term affair with a blonde on the cover of the Latin side of Vince Guaraldi. Then in '64, Jazz Impressions of a Boy Named Charlie Brown, which was a documentary about Charlie Brown. And then in '65, A Charlie Brown Christmas. And that's his last record for Fantasy. And I asked Mike Clark, who I interviewed here recently on the channel, who played extensively with Vince Guaraldi in the '70s, I asked him, did Guaraldi get tired of having to play the Peanuts theme? And he said not at all. He really dug it. He was really happy that he had written it, and it was always a joy to play it, even though when we played it real hardcore jazz rooms, we didn't play it. He said if we played it more commercial gigs, and in the rooms for the hippies, that's what Mike said, then they played the Linus and Lucy and Christmas Time and all the Charlie Brown stuff. But, you know, we automatically also associate Charlie Brown and Peanuts with Vince Guaraldi. It's so, and I was, for the clip I played in the beginning of this video, even that, the brief dialogue is so sharp. They're like adults. Charlie Brown saying to, I forgot that character's name, I guess you wouldn't know sarcasm if it slapped you in the face. You know, it's very kind of New York in a way. And I believe, I don't know if Charles Schultz, I believe he was in California. But we like Charlie Brown because it was kind of like him against the world, and he was kind of like a sad sack everyman, I guess, was his popularity. But I don't know, is this still a popular record? It must be, they reissued it. But do kids still watch the Charlie Brown Christmas specials and Charlie Brown? I don't have any kids. I don't have any idea. Maybe you all can tell me out there if it has been. A friend of mine said, yeah, these are still popular. People still watch that, but it certainly doesn't have anywhere near the consciousness in the public that it didn't back then. It was huge back then. Charlie Brown was a touchstone and was spoken of across all different media, not just in comic strips. But also that was the era of comic strips. When you were a kid, when I was a kid, you know, I always read the comic strips in the paper next to the Ann Landers column. You know, I read Dondi and Charlie Brown and Superman, and there was so much great stuff to watch. Guaraldi has such a meaty, swinging style, and he's always a joy to listen to. Prior to this record, the Charlie Brown record, in 1962, he won the Grammy for Best Original Jazz Composition for Cast Your Fate to the Wind, which was also a movie, I believe, but Wikipedia doesn't make that clear. So he did this record in 1965, and then he followed it up in 1967 with this other record they've just reissued, music from the soundtrack, It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. And these are both on Kraft, and Kraft sent me this pumpkin-shaped 45 RPM record. Both of these records sound really fantastic. I'm reviewing right now these fine audio bookshelf speakers, and with these speakers, the better gear I put with them, the better they sound. And playing this record on my Kuzma through a shit Audio Ragnarok amp into the fine SP 500, I'm asleep, I can't tell you, 500 speakers, it was a beautiful sound. Lush, meaty, very present, very upfront. This is a really nice job from Kraft, even though I doubt very seriously this is done from tapes. After this, Vince Guaraldi scored 12 more Peanut specials, and because of that, he became quite wealthy. And because he was quite wealthy, he never left San Francisco. Even though he got offers to play tours, he just stayed in San Francisco because he dug it. And I was in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and man, I've been there before. What a beautiful place. And can you imagine the 60s? It must have been amazing. Even though he was asked to do many more soundtracks, he never did, which is really interesting. That's not the American model. If you are successful with something, people ask you to do more, but you keep doing it. But he didn't, which is really amazing. The Peanuts thing is his signature. And it's a wonderful pressing. It sounds really great. They had, I think earlier in the year, they crafted a whole run of Charlie Brown, Vince Guaraldi records. Anyway, Vince Guaraldi died in 1976 at the age of 47, which is a real drag. Can you imagine? Apparently he died of a heart attack. He had arterial sclerosis. He was contacted by producer Lee Mendelson after they did the documentary, Jazz Impressions of Charlie Brown, of a Boy Named Charlie Brown. They spoke to Guaraldi to do it, and Guaraldi wrote the music and was so excited he called Lee Mendelson on the phone and said, I've got to play this for you, the Linus and Lucy theme. And Mendelson like, well, I don't want to hear it over the phone. And he said, okay, well, I have to go. I have to play this for somebody. He was very excited he'd come up with a great composition. It's funny, the Wikipedia entry doesn't really say a lot about his history. I guess he's from San Francisco. He did play with Cal Tjader, which those Cal Tjader records on Fantasy are all fantastic recordings, and his later records on Verve are really great too. I think Cal Tjader is kind of like Milt Jackson in that way that a vibraphonist. Jackson also played vibes. Those guys never played bad solos. They played perfect solos, and they made so many great records. Both Milt Jackson and Cal Tjader, the records are really consistent. The quality is so high. You're hearing the sound of guys who had mastered their instruments and were just really having a great time. Anyway, it's really early here for me in New York City, but thanks for tuning in and watching another episode of Ken McAuliffe, the Jazz Vinyl Audiophile, and I'll leave you with this.
So, have you figured out a way to work the wheel into it?
We know it's hard because wheels aren't really seen as exciting technology, even though they are the original.
Technology is a glittering lure. There's the rare occasion when the public can be engaged on a level beyond flash, if they have a sentimental bond with the product. Nostalgia. It's delicate, but potent.
In Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone. This device isn't a spaceship. It's a time machine. It's backwards and forwards. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. It's not called the wheel. It's called the carousel. It lets us travel the way a child travels. Round and around, and back home again, to a place where we know we are loved.
Good luck at your next meeting.